This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by the 13th China Healthcare Summit. Join BioCentury, Bay Helix, and Insights partner McKinsey & Company in Shanghai, November 2nd to 4th, for a first-hand look at China's innovation moment.
Hi, I'm Tierney Baum, Biopharma Analyst at BioCentury, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Klaus Romero, CEO and CSO of Critical Path Institute, also known as CPath. Klaus has been at CPath for nearly 2 decades, first as the Director of Clinical Pharmacology, then as Executive Director of Clinical Pharmacology and Quantitative Medicine. He's helped lead the work behind major regulatory milestones, including the first FDA and EMA endorsement of a clinical trial simulation tool for Alzheimer's, the first qualified imaging biomarker for polycystic kidney disease, and drug development infrastructure that contributed to the first new tuberculosis drug and regimen approved in over 50 years. Klaus was named CEO 2 years ago, and since has seen the launch of several new initiatives, most recently One to Millions, a public-private effort to make individualized therapies for genetic diseases scalable beyond a single patient, and the focus of our conversation today. Klaus, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tierney. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So, Klaus, it's my understanding that One to Millions initiative is a response to that FDA's recent Plausible mechanism framework, which has been created to accelerate drug development for genetically driven rare diseases. Before we dig into the initiative itself, what do you think is missing from our current regulatory framework that's stalling these therapies?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tierney. So right now there's a disconnect because right now the technology exists to design technologies like oligonucleotides or gene editing therapies or gene therapies or even cell-based therapies that can be designed to target very specific mutations that cause very specific types of conditions. But you don't see those technologies being developed at scale. The technology exists today for the solutions to be designed specifically for a mutation I may have, a mutation you may have, a mutation a family member may have, but we don't see that being developed at scale today. The question is why? Well, because the regulatory framework is still focused on the paradigm of large population level trials. If you look at what the statute really reads that governs FDA, it specifically states that the FDA is compelled to make decisions to approve medical products based on well-designed scientific investigations that demonstrate the efficacy and the safety of said products. It just so happened that since the 1960s, the paradigm became that the gold standard well-designed scientific investigation to demonstrate efficacy and safety was the clinical trial, the randomized clinical trial model. That's great, but that is limited to the context of the 1960s, the 1970s, of drugs that were targeted to overarching physiology of humans rather than the very specific tailored targeting of mutations that cause diseases. So the FDA is very forward-looking in the sense that they put out this guidance document titled, as you said, the Plausible Mechanism Framework Draft Guidance that starts looking at how the whole framework of evidence generation could look like for the actual scaling of the development of these therapies. That's what is so innovative about that guidance document. And what it does, it also, because you mentioned something about this being about rare diseases, that's true. But if you think about it, it's not so much about the frequency of a given condition, but the specificity of the potentially druggable mutation that could be the target for these technologies. And that's what, again, connects with an unmet need to bridge the gap between technology and science that exists today and the actual development of those products at scale.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answered that question.
Absolutely. And so, to piggyback off of that, what specifically why is CPath right for this? What can you guys do here that FDA or a single sponsor would struggle to do on their own?
Yeah. So the notion is that a lot of people, a lot of groups have worked on these technologies and on these types of genetically driven diseases for a long time. What we do at CPath is provide a unique neutral ground with the legal infrastructure, the scientific infrastructure, and the regulatory infrastructure for those groups that have already moved the needle in different parts of the ecosystem to come together and synergize and move the needle together jointly to maximize the transformation of paradigms. That is what our added value represents. And so we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not trying to come in and redo what has been done, but maximize what has been done into a joint movement that can actually meet the vision of what the FDA laid out in the plausible mechanism framework guidance. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, so in the recent article that my colleague Steve Usden wrote, you talk about shifting from a product to product approval for each one of these individualized therapies to a new paradigm of process-based regulation. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question right there. In order for that vision to materialize, we're going to need a collaborative understanding of the evidentiary considerations, the data considerations, and the process considerations that needs to include manufacturing for that vision to materialize. But that can't happen overnight. We need to start generating the science and putting the tools in front of everyone, maximizing the work that has already been done in order to start generating those considerations and those standards that then everyone in that collaborative environment that we provide, industry, scientists, academicians, clinicians, and the voice of the lived experience can all come together with the regulators and define what each one of those components needs to look like so that there is mutual understanding, consensus, and trust in the components of the system. That's one aspect of it. But then the second aspect of it is the continued evolution of those considerations and how as we generate the solutions based on the data that exists, there will be data that will be generated as the process continues to be defined. We need to loop those data back into the system so that the process itself can evolve and can get continuously optimized. Again, with the trust and the participation of everyone in the ecosystem. I hope that answered that question.
So, I know this got started last year. In the near term, what does success look like for you guys?
Yeah, great question. So, it started last year with some of the background conversations. It culminated with a few public meetings that our colleagues at Duke Margolis hosted, thanks to the leadership of FDA, and then the guidance document that came out. Now we're at the stage of actually defining the founding membership and the funding construct for the collaboration to get off the ground now that we have the background components in place. So what does success look like? To get the founding members into the collaboration and to get started with some data integration activities that are going to be needed, beginning with where there are more data points, which right now it's in the antisense oligonucleotide space, where we are aiming to integrate those data from industry, starting with the preclinical and translational data sources, so that we can then standardize those data and start generating some solutions that can allow any future sponsor to plug in the envisioned structure of a novel ASO targeting a very specific mutation against everything that is known regarding the safety signals of all previous ASOs, so that they can be informed, the sponsor can be informed, and the regulators can be informed as to the potential level of safety concerns, so that they can make more informed go, no go decisions. And if the decision is a no go, you'll using an industry term, you'll fail fast. And so you don't advance something that is not going to pan out in the end. But if you make a go decision, you'll know in a much more informed way what additional evidence you need to gather from the translational studies. Do you really need to repeat the same primate studies all the time? Or can you use novel advanced methods or some other mechanism to confirm the signals that are identified in the first pass, so that you actually make it efficient and scientifically sound regarding the kind of evidence that you need to demonstrate that early efficacy setting? That's So getting the database in, getting the members to sign up, getting the database started, and getting the solutions begun, as I described for this integrated look at ASO safety signals in a way that doesn't expose any of the previous safety signals, previous ASO. We can talk about the data sharing philosophy, but in a way that maximizes the value of those data for everyone involved in the ecosystem. I'll stop with that.
And why are ASOs the right place to start with this versus another modality?
Yeah, great question. It's a matter of, number one, where a lot of investments have happened over the past few years, but not necessarily where a lot of the successes may have lied over the past few years. And there's a lot of investments that could actually start moving with the proposed generation of the database. The other is a very practical reason that, compared to other modalities of technologies that can be designed to target very specific mutations, ASOs is where the majority of the data lie. And so if you combine the two reasons, that's the logic behind starting with ASOs.
Right. So I know CPATH has a track record of integrating large data sets. This isn't new to you guys, creating analytics tools from those. So with that expertise, what do you foresee being the biggest bottleneck to getting something like this off the ground in terms of the data?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing is that we're going to apply the same philosophy we have applied to the generation of our data and analytics platform. We're not a data vendor. We're, like I said, the organization that brings everyone together to move the needle and change some paradigms and deconvolute and remove bottlenecks from the process. But the solutions that we are known for developing that actually remove those bottlenecks, those solutions tend to be very data hungry. So by necessity, we had to build a data and analytics platform that allowed us to integrate the data from industry, from universities, from hospitals, etc., to be able to generate those solutions. So we have the data analytics platform that we have today has over 750,000 individual records from trials from industry, observational studies from academia, patient registries from patient groups, electronic health records, and preclinical data sources. So we have the capacity built to start growing it for the tailoring of the needs for the 1 to millions collaboration. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we have a process that has generated the trust from industry, from universities, from hospitals, from scientists to share data with us. And that is based on a process that we have built and continue to refine constantly called the Data Contribution Agreement process. This is a process by which we not only comply with all the global data privacy regulations, but we also put the data contributors in control of the level of accessibility that they would like to see with their data. So part of that process you can imagine as a dial that has a minimum and a maximum. A data contributor can set the dial to whatever level they're comfortable with. So what is the minimum? The minimum is a provision in which the data contributor allows only CPATH and regulators to see their data in aggregate. Never individualized studies, but in aggregate, together with the other data sources that are contributed. So then the question becomes, okay, so if the data can only be seen by CPATH and the regulators in aggregate, what's the point? Well, the point is that as the solutions get built, the solutions that we build are all openly accessible. So even if the data that were used to build the solutions may have some provisions that restrict their accessibility, the solutions built on the data are all open for anyone to use. So that's the minimum. The maximum is a situation in which the data contributor may say, well, actually, help me out in making sure that these data can be seen and accessed by quote unquote qualified researchers. If they set the dial to that maximum, that compels us to set up a data governance strategy and a data governance process and all that. What's in between? Anything that makes life easy for the data contributor. We have countless examples of companies that have said, look, the control arm can go to a qualified researcher, the active arm is over here as we get the drug approved, or as we have some time gone by after the drug is approved, we can renegotiate the provisions and increase the accessibility to the data. They can say, well, we actually partner with a data vendor and they help us make the data available to qualified researchers. Cool. We definitely don't want to reinvent any wheel or compete with some of the good partner data vendors that we have collaborations with. We let them handle the accessibility to the data, but then we still retain the ability to integrate data for the building of the solutions. That's a process that we've built over 21 years. That's a process that we plan to put to use to the benefit of the 1 to million collaborations. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, thank you, Klaus. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about where industry comes in the picture and how CPATH plans to take this initiative global.
This episode of the BioCentury Show is brought to you by the 13th China Healthcare Summit, taking place November 2nd to 4th in Shanghai. Everyone has an opinion about China biotech, but there's a difference between reading about cross-border deals and seeing it for yourself. The 13th China Healthcare Summit brings you to Shanghai November 2nd to 4th for a first-hand look at China's innovation moment. Join BioCentury, Bay Helix, and Insights partner McKinsey & Company for a deep dive into China's biopharma ecosystem and meet the biotech leaders who are driving all the news flow. Sourcing innovation, building new codes, generating faster clinical data, reimagining your R&D strategy. For a dozen years, the China Healthcare Summit has gathered the right people to network and build business. Now it's your chance to be in the room. Join us in Shanghai this November. Opt into the tour of Suzhou and a visit to Shanghai Clinical Trial Centers. See it for yourself. Register at BioCenturyChinaSummit.com.
We're back on the BioCentury Show. I'm Tierney Baum, Biopharma Analyst here at BioCentury, and I'm here with Klaus Romero, CEO of the Critical Path Institute, talking about the 1 to Millions initiative. So, we've talked some about the data itself. When I hear things like large data aggregation, that sounds like an opportunity for AI. Is that central to this initiative? And how are you planning to use it to your advantage here?
Yeah. AI is one of those areas that is unavoidable. In this era of drug development and regulatory science innovation. So let me take a step back and just reflect on what we've seen over 21 years of existence. There were things that back in the day were also touted as the panacea that was going to solve everyone's problems. Model-informed drug development was one of them. Patient-reported outcomes was another one of them. Surrogate endpoints was another one of them. There's always this hope versus hype equation with every single one of those new methods. If you reflect back on every single one of those, eventually they landed into the actual value that they can provide. And so AI is really no different. It does have a lot of potential, but it needs to be dosed against what unmet needs it can actually solve in a better or unique way against other approaches. There's a principle that in the clin farm world is a mantra that we get ingrained in our brains as we go through the discipline of clin farm, and that's the parsimonious principle. Don't overcomplicate your models if you don't need to. So, if there's a way to build a solution that is just based on frequentist statistics, by all means do that. You don't need to overcomplicate things with anything other than a t-test if you can get away with that. But there are other places where AI can generate hypotheses in a way that other methods can't, identify interplay between variables and within variables that other methods don't do as well. Some predictions, some help with integrating unstructured data. I mean, there's a lot of potential applications for AI that we definitely are going to integrate, but not in a way that we say, oh, 1 to Millions is an AI type of collaboration. It will use AI as well as pharmacometrics and statistics and applied mathematics and maybe even mechanistic modeling to look at what the solutions need to be built on to materialize the vision of what the FDA laid out in the guidance document. But to give you a very specific example, if we really want to integrate the ASO data and then build a solution that allows a sponsor to plug in a full three-dimensional render of the envisioned structure of the envisioned ASO for a given mutation, and then compare that against all the other safety signals, an AI component to such a tool is a great application of the AI capabilities. But it's not like every single solution or every component of the process is going to necessarily have an AI component. That's one. And then second, We're also very much about this notion that was also developed by the FDA, by a really smart scientist at FDA who has since left the agency, Tina Morrison, where she laid out this concept of model credibility. And we plan to use that assessment, that method, to determine if a given model, with whatever method behind it, is credible to solve the unmet need that it was designed to solve. I hope that answered that question.
Yes. I know a lot of the discourse around this has focused on rare disease specifically, where obviously the need is great. You know, I spent a lot of years working in that area, and it's obvious to me that this could be a huge boon there. But you've been clear that this is more of a disease agnostic approach that can have wide applications. Can you tell us more about how this might open up the economic viability of individualized medicine broadly?
Yeah, of course. So, again, the guidance document is very clear, and the agency has been very clear about the fact that this is not a guidance document that is envisioned for any specific level of a frequency of a condition. It's about how specific underlying mutations could be targeted or druggable to have an impact on diseases that are genetically driven. So yeah, ultra rare diseases absolutely can benefit from this. We have one-off examples of successful treatment, like baby KJ and Millicent and all that, but those are very costly, very sparse one-offs. So those types of communities can definitely benefit from this. But this is not just about ultra rare. I mean, if you just take a disease like a neuromuscular condition, it has a phenotype, but the phenotype is driven by potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of mutations that end up with the same clinical presentation or an equivalent clinical presentation. You can still develop drugs that target the majority of that population, but in order to have a true disease-modifying impact, you could take the individual mutations and assess how specifically they can be targeted, and they can be drugged with some of these technologies, and then develop those solutions at scale, and essentially have the process repeat itself so that you end up impacting eventually the totality of a disease. Even if you take a non-rare disease like, pick one, Parkinson's disease. There are specific forms of Parkinsonian disorders that are driven by very specific mutations. If you just say Parkinson's disease, that may sound like it's a non-rare disease, but within the subtypes, once you start slicing, you end up in a very similar rare disease situation where you have a very specific mutation that could be druggable and targeted with these types of technologies. And eventually, the process is intended to also serve the needs of those populations because, again, it's not about the frequency of a condition, it's about the specificity of the mutation that could be targeted. I hope that answered that question.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. I think almost any disease, there's a need to kind of stratify beyond what we're doing, and so many can be genetically stratified. Excellent. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for on this edition of the BioCentury Show. Klaus, it's been a pleasure speaking with you as always. Thanks for joining us, and to our audience, thanks for watching. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next BioCentury Show.
Thank you, Tierney. Thanks, everyone.
Brought to you by the 13th China Healthcare Summit. Join BioCentury, Bay Helix, and Insights partner McKinsey & Company in Shanghai, November 2nd to 4th, for a first-hand look at China's innovation moment.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the BioCentury Show. The group connects science and technology professionals, and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.